when they cleared the scene.
Correct.
Thank you. That's all we have.
Anything on that?
Nothing further.
All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Please
Your
step
Honor.
down. Thank you. Attorney Buckingham.
Call Richard Lippard.
Good afternoon, sir. Afternoon. You felt like they were right hand to third.
Good afternoon. Just on this way, I think I'm just coming to the institution.
All right, good afternoon, sir.
Afternoon, sir.
All right. Attorney Buckingham, please.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Could you please tell the jurors your first and last name?
Richard Lippard,
And can you spell your last name for the record?
Lippard.
And how are you employed?
I work for the Duxbury Police Department.
And how long have you been a police officer?
6.5 years.
Have you worked for Duxbury the entire time, or did you work someplace else?
The entire time.
What's your current assignment at the Duxbury Police?
Patrolman.
Back in January of 2023, were you also on patrol then?
Yes, ma'am.
Were you working the day of January 24th, 2023?
Yes.
At some point while you were on shift that day, were you asked to assist in an ongoing investigation for an incident that occurred at 47 Summer Street in Duxbury?
Yes. I was called back in.
You were called back in?
Yep.
Had you finished your shift?
Yes, ma'am.
And so where were you asked to go?
To the police department.
When you came to the police department, where did they direct you to go as far as the investigation went?
South Shore Hospital in Weymouth.
And so when you arrived at South Shore Hospital, was there already another Duxbury officer there?
Detective Mafia was there.
Okay. And what was the purpose of you going to South Shore Hospital?
To overwatch the person in custody.
Okay. And did you learn who that person was?
Yes.
And fair to say that individual was a woman by the name of Lindsay Clancy, correct?
Yes.
What were your observations of her when you were at South Shore Hospital?
She seemed to be sedated, not speaking or anything on the hospital bed, just laying there.
And excuse me, when you were there, or during the time that you were there, did you ever have any conversation with her?
No.
Did she remain unresponsive during the time that you were there?
Yes.
And were you also there when somebody came in and took some photographs of her?
I do not recall.
Were medical staff tending to her during the time that you were with her?
Yes.
Where in the South Shore Hospital was this? The emergency department or someplace else?
Emergency department.
And shortly after you were there observing her, did she or did the doctors indicate she was going to be transported someplace else?
Yes.
Where was she going to go?
That she was going to be med-flighted to the Brigham in Boston.
And other than yourself or other law enforcement and medical staff, did anyone speak with her at the South Shore Hospital?
No.
And when she was transported to the hospital in Boston, did you go along with the transport?
Yes.
Do you remember how she was transported?
It was a med-flight helicopter.
So you rode in the helicopter with her?
Yes.
And when you arrived at the Brigham in Boston, where did she go there?
She went to the emergency room.
Did you remain with her during that time period?
Correct.
And was there anyone else with you at the Brigham with her?
Officer Broderick.
And so the two of you what was your role?
Just to overwatch and stay with her.
At any point when you were with her at the Brigham, was she ever awake or responsive?
No, not to my knowledge.
And how long were you at the Brigham with her?
About 15 to 16 hours.
Okay, so fair to say it was over the course of that night into the next morning?
Yes, ma'am.
Over the course of the night into the next morning, do you observe her medical status change?
There was some type of medical code during the nighttime. I'm not sure what it was.
Okay, but you were present in the room when that happened?
Yes, we were outside the room.
Outside.
Yeah.
And the next morning, when your shift concluded, did somebody else from the Duxbury Police Department come and relieve you?
Yes.
During the time that you were there, did anyone besides medical staff or the law enforcement officers that you were with interact with the defendant?
No.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Mr. Reddington.
Morning.
Morning.
Afternoon. So, young man working for the town of Duxbury, and you were detailed to the home initially, correct?
No, sir.
You didn't go to the house at all?
No, sir.
Okay, you went directly to South Shore.
Correct.
And when you were at South Shore, your purpose was to, as you say, overwatch. Well, that basically is she was in custody at that point, right?
Correct.
So one of your obligations is to, I guess, guard the unconscious person and make sure to do what? Just to stand there?
Correct.
Okay. And you did in the South Shore Hospital, right?
Yes, sir.
And you made your observations of her, bandaged or whatever, laying in the bed, and she was not conscious, correct?
Correct.
And at some point, the decision was made medically that they were going to have her med-flighted to the Boston Hospital, Brigham and Women's, right?
Correct.
And that was by way of the helicopter.
Yes, sir.
You had a helicopter ride into Boston with her, right?
Yes, sir.
You were overwatching her in the helicopter again, right?
Yes, sir.
She still had not gained consciousness at all.
Correct.
She wasn't talking to you or medical staff or anybody, right?
Correct.
She was already had the tubes and stuff in her mouth coming out, and she was bandaged up and wrapped up and basically laying down in the gurney in the helicopter, right?
Yes, sir.
So when she gets to Brigham and Women's Hospital, they bring her into the emergency room, right?
Yes.
And that room was loaded with equipment, boxes, wires, tubes, buzzing beeps, lights, things of that nature, right?
Yes.
Life-saving equipment that was in there, right?
Yes.
Very small room, wasn't it?
Yes.
Kind of hard to maneuver.
There was enough space for the medical staff to maneuver.
All right. And how many police officers were overwatching the unconscious person while she was in the emergency room at Brigham and Women?
2.
That would be you and the other officer from Duxbury.
Yes, sir.
At what point did the state police officers arrive in the hospital?
I don't recall them coming to the hospital.
Did you ever see state police in the hospital?
Possibly at South Shore Hospital, but not in Boston.
So you're in Brigham and Women's, off of the helicopter into the emergency room for a day, is that correct?
Correct. 16 hours.
Did you go back there again after that day?
To South Shore Hospital?
No, Brigham and Women's Hospital.
No.
So you're limited to the time that you were there as to you and your brother officer were there in the room with her, correct?
Yes.
And a number of nurses and doctors, right?
Yes.
Fair to say it was chaos. It was like bedlam in that room, wasn't it?
Yes, very busy.
And you don't remember any other police officers? How about internal police officers from Brigham and Women's Hospital? Do you recall them being there?
There may have been security, but I do not recall.
So is it your testimony that you do not recall any other police being in that room or outside the room when you were there?
Correct.
Now, at some point, police were detailed, if you know, to sit outside the room to guard the door. Is that correct?
Yes.
And what were you guarding against?
Objection.
No, overall.
Anybody coming to visit?
Right, because nobody was allowed to visit, right?
Correct.
And then while you were there in the early morning hours, about 2:24 or something like that, there was, as you said to the jury, a code, right?
Yes.
And again, that kind of amped up the bedlam at that point, didn't it?
Yes, sir.
There were people running from all over, and you could hear on the microphone, code blue, with the room being identified, right?
Yes.
And that meant that she was dead or dying, right?
Yes.
She was chained to the hospital bed, too, wasn't she?
I do not recall her being handcuffed.
You don't?
No, sir.
Okay. Do you recall when you left?
The Brigham, sir?
Yes.
The next morning around 10, from what I remember.
Okay. And you were relieved by who?
Officer Daly from the Duxbury Police Department and Officer Johnson from the Duxbury Police Department.
All right, so you've got 2 Duxbury police officers. And there, to your memory, were there any other law enforcement officers?
Not with them, no.
How about on their own? Did you observe other law enforcement officers come in that room or outside the room?
No, sir.
And then that was the end of your shift and you left?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you, sir.
All right. Counsel, anything further?
No, thank you.
All right, thank you, sir. You sit down. Thank you.
Commonwealth calls Dr. Mark Tenerowicz.
Just for the record, Your Honor, I'm just voting object to this, agree the circumstances. And
Do you want to go to sidebar?
Yeah, please. Would you? All right. Attorney Sprague, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right. Good afternoon, Doctor.
Afternoon, sir.
If I may?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Could you please state and spell your name for the record?
Mark Joseph Tenerowicz, Markjoseph Tenerowicz.
And what is your date of birth, sir?
2/28/69.
What do you do for a living?
I was an emergency physician. I'm currently not acting as an emergency physician.
Okay. What do you currently do?
I do disability review for the state of Rhode Island.
And so directing your attention back to January of 2023, were you an emergency room physician at that time?
Yes, I was.
And where did you work?
Beth Israel Deaconess, Plymouth.
And could you briefly describe for the jurors your educational background and the training that you underwent to qualify to be an emergency room physician?
I did my undergraduate education at Trinity College. I did a one-year post-baccalaureate pre-medical program at Bryn Mawr College. I then got my medical degree from Brown University, and I did my residency in emergency medicine at UMass Memorial in Worcester.
And when you finished your education and training, did you work in emergency care after that point up until you changed positions?
I worked in emergency medicine from 1997 until May of 2025.
And directing your attention to January 24th, 2023, were you working in the evening hours that day?
I was.
And at some point in time, did you treat a child named Dawson Clancy?
Yes.
How did he arrive at the hospital?
He arrived by fire department ambulance.
And when he arrived, were you given a summary of his injuries by emergency personnel?
Yes.
What did you learn at that time?
I was told that he reportedly had been strangled and he was found without a pulse and not breathing.
And what observations did you make of Dawson yourself?
When he arrived, he had a breathing tube in. They had placed a device into the bone of his leg to give him intravenous fluids and medicines. CPR was in progress. He was not breathing on his own and he had no pulse and was not responding.
And did you observe any trauma to his body?
I believe there were some old appearing bruises on his legs and there was some ruptured blood vessels on his face.
And did you observe anything in the area of his neck?
Not that I can recall.
And what did you do to treat Dawson?
We continued CPR. We continued to give him IV fluids. We gave him doses of adrenaline to try and restart his heart. We confirmed that the breathing tube was in the right position. We eventually gave medicines to treat the presumed acid buildup in his blood. We gave him calcium to make sure that his heart would, if it started again, would beat effectively. And that's what we did.
And how did you go about making sure that the breathing apparatus was in place properly?
Basically 4 ways. We detected carbon dioxide in the air coming out of his lungs, which usually just comes from the lungs. I listened and could hear breath sounds. I looked with a video laryngoscope to confirm that the tube was between the vocal cords going into the lungs, and we did an x-ray.
And when you say you were hearing breath sounds, was that him breathing on his own or something else breathing for him?
That it was someone breathing for him, squeezing the bag attached to the breathing tube.
Okay. And so that the breath sounds you heard just confirmed that whoever was squeezing the bag valve mask, the air from that was going into the lungs and then carbon dioxide was coming out?
He was not breathing spontaneously.
Okay. And are you, while all of this is happening, are you continuing to assess him and his condition?
Yes.
And what were your assessments?
So we would stop periodically every several minutes to very briefly check to see if he was breathing on his own or if he had a pulse. And he was not at any point. At one point, towards the end of the resuscitation, I used an ultrasound to determine if his heart was beating effectively, and there was no evidence of that.
Okay. And based on your training and experience, at some point in time, did you make a determination that your efforts weren't going to be successful?
I did, based on the time from when resuscitative efforts started in the field by the paramedics and the time that we put in, and the fact that despite the best resuscitative efforts we could, the fluids, the medicines, the CPR, breathing for him, it did not look like his heart would ever start again.
Approximately how long did you and your team work on Dawson?
I believe we worked on Dawson about 40 minutes in addition to what the paramedics had done previously.
At any point in time, did you try to use a defibrillator?
I did not.
And why is that?
He was unfortunately never in a heart rhythm that would have made defibrillation an effective treatment.
So your heart has to be in a certain condition for a defibrillator to even work?
Yes, there are 2 heart rhythms, basically equivalent of the heart, that if you use a defibrillator, you can restore a rhythm that makes the heart beat effectively. He was never in one of those rhythms.
And at some point in time, did you declare Dawson deceased?
Yes.
Okay. And do you recall when that was?
I believe from my review of the records recently, it was at 1928.
In 1928, would that be 7:28 p.m.?
That's correct.
Thank you, Doctor.
Mr. Reddington.
Afternoon. You indicated that you observed what appeared to be older bruises to his legs, his lower
Yes.
legs, that like shin area? That
Yes.
area? And you also had an interosseous device, I think, is that what you said?
Yes, he did.
And that would require inserting a needle or something into the actual shin bone area?
Yes, into the tibia.
Thank you, sir. That's all I have.
All right. Anything further?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
I'll move to call Dr. Benjamin Kaufman.
Doctor.
Good afternoon. It's almost clear that the testimony you may have mentioned should be
I do.
Thank you, sir. You may take a seat.
Watch your step, please.
All right. Good afternoon, Doctor.
Just for the record, Your Honor, I'd like to just note the same objection.
Same ruling.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon. Could you please state and spell your name for the record?
It's Benjamin Kaufman, Benjamin Kaufman,
And your date of birth, sir?
September 10th, 1984.
What do you do for a living?
I'm an emergency medicine doctor.
How long have you been doing that?
About 12 years.
Could you briefly describe for the jurors your educational and training background that qualifies you for that role?
Yeah, I went to Boston University for medical school, and then Kings County for residency training, and then Columbia for fellowship in global emergency medicine.
And where do you currently work?
Beth Israel in Plymouth.
And back in January of 2023, did you work there?
I did.
And specifically on January 24th, 2023, were you working that evening?
I was.
And while you were working that evening, did you treat a patient named Patrick Clancy?
Yes, that was my patient.
And do you recall how he arrived at the hospital?
Yes, with the EMS, with CPR ongoing.
And is it typical that when EMS arrive with a patient, they give you kind of a summary or a rundown of the patient's condition?
It is.
And did they give you that rundown on Callan's condition?
They did. He, at the time, his heart had stopped and CPR was ongoing, and he was not breathing. He was receiving breaths via bag valve mask ventilation.
And what did you do in terms of treating Callan?
So as soon as he came in, basically we put in a breathing tube, and we were able to get an IV established. The first thing that we do is give a dose of epinephrine, and in this case, you can look directly at the heart with an ultrasound, and his heart started beating after we were able to give that dose. At that point, we continued compressions, continued giving him breaths through the breathing tube, and Plymouth Hospital does not have pediatrics or the ability to care for that level of pediatric patients, so we're on the phone with Boston Children's Hospital, making preparations basically to get him to the more definitive care.
And about how long into your care of Callan did he regain a heartbeat?
Probably from the time that he got to the ER, maybe like 10 minutes or so, I'm guessing.
At any point in time, did he regain the ability to breathe on his own while he was in your care?
No.
Did you do any examination or testing to determine Callan's brain function?
So at no point did he exhibit any brain function. I'm not like a neurologist, so we are not the definitive person, but in emergency medicine, there's a scale called the Glasgow Coma Scale, which is generally from 3 to 15. There's different variations for pediatrics, but he scored the lowest, which basically is you're in a coma or have no brain response during the entire time that he was in my care.
So on that scale, the 3 to 15, 15, would that be someone who's walking and talking and acting normally?
That's correct.
And a 3, is that someone with no brain function?
That is correct.
And you testified that Callan was at a 3 when you treated him?
At no time during his care did he have any brain function that was evident on my exam.
And at some point in time, was it decided to transfer his care to Boston Children's Hospital?
Yes, we were in contact with him basically immediately, and then he was flown by helicopter to Boston Children's Hospital, and the whole time the ICU doctors were on the phone reviewing the case and making recommendations.
And at any point in time, to your knowledge, from the time he entered the emergency department at Beth Israel Deaconess Plymouth until he arrived at Boston Children's Hospital, was he able to breathe on his own?
No.
Thank you, doctor.
All right, counsel.
I have no questions. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, doctor. Attorney Buckingham.
Your Honor, the Commonwealth would call Melissa Arcadipane.
Good afternoon. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you may have that you shall give to the court and the jury the matter
Good to see you. Watch your step, please.
Hi, good afternoon. Attorney Buckingham, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Could you please tell the jurors your first and last name?
Melissa Arcadipane,
Can you spell your last name for the record?
Arcadipane.
And did you work for South Shore Hospital?
Yes.
And what was your role at South Shore Hospital?
My last role was a supervisor of the specimen processing department in the laboratory.
And do you still work in that role?
No.
Okay. Back in 2023, specifically January, were you in that role?
Yes.
And how long had you worked for, or have you worked for South Shore Hospital over the course of the years?
Over 20 years.
You said that you were the specimen processing supervisor?
Correct.
What are the general responsibilities for that role?
Overseeing the department where all of the specimens from within the hospital and even outside of the hospital will come in through that department to be received, checked, make sure they have orders, make sure they're collected in the correct tube.
And the laboratory at South Shore Hospital is responsible for processing blood samples, urine samples that come from other areas of the hospital, correct?
Correct.
So can you just generally tell us how a blood or urine sample would come from the emergency department at South Shore Hospital to the laboratory?
So in most cases, blood sample or urine will come through a pneumatic tube system from the emergency room. They'll put it in a tube, hit a button, and it will come over to the lab, which was across the street. And we would take it out of that canister and process it at that point.
And the specimens that are collected in a place like the emergency department are done by a nurse or technician who takes the samples, puts them in the appropriate vial or tube, and labels them, correct?
Correct.
And so when they come to you through that pneumatic system, what does your laboratory do with the samples?
Well, we check the sample, make sure it's labeled, make sure it's in the correct tube, and then we would process it.
And traditionally, would your laboratory receive several samples, meaning several vials of blood or urine from one patient?
They could, yes.
And as far as the orders for testing, you at the laboratory would only run particular tests that are ordered by a physician, correct?
Correct.
Does that usually consume the whole sample that you receive from the emergency department?
Not always, no.
And so would it be a common procedure that samples from a particular patient would be retained in case additional testing needed to be done?
Yes.
And working in the lab as the specimen processing supervisor, are you familiar with what is referred to as a preservation notice?
I am.
What do you know that to be?
So that is a notice that we would receive from a law enforcement agency asking us to hold specific samples for a particular patient.
And what would your laboratory do when you receive a preservation notice for a particular patient?
So the samples would be pulled aside, they would be put in a specimen bag, a copy of that preservation notice gets put in the bag with the samples, and it is put in a separate bin within the specimen refrigerator.
And the specimen refrigerator, is that a place that specimens are stored until they're either used or discarded?
Correct.
And does that preserve the specimen? Meaning
well, they need to be refrigerated. So, but we separate those specimens that potentially could be needed elsewhere into a separate spot so that they don't get discarded.
Now, were you aware that a preservation notice had been served on South Shore Hospital for the blood and urine of Lindsay Clancy on January 24th, 2023?
I was.
And were those samples of blood and urine collected in the same manner you just described and put in a separate bin?
Yes.
And on January 31st, 2023, did you have the opportunity to interact with a trooper from the Massachusetts State Police?
I did.
And what was that interaction? Can you describe it to us?
He came with a warrant to collect the specimens.
And so did you collect the specimens that were labeled for Lindsay Clancy?
I did. Somebody had already put them in that bin in a bag, so I just went to the bin, retrieved them, made sure they were hers, and gave them to the officer.
And in fact, you handed over 6 vials of blood and 1 vial of urine to the trooper on that day, correct?
I don't remember the exact samples or sample type that I handed over, but I do know that I gave him samples.
Okay. And as far as your memory, you recall that you double-checked the ID label on the items to make sure that they belong to Lindsay Clancy, correct?
Definitely.
Okay. Nothing further. Thank you.
All right. Counsel?
No questions, thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Your Honor, at this time, the Commonwealth would move to submit the certified medical records from Beth Israel Deaconess in Plymouth for Cora Clancy, Dawson Clancy, and Callan Clancy in one binder.
No objection.
All right. They may be admitted.
We could approach sidebar.
Yes. In terms of the jury, in talking to counsel, we are going to break for today. All right? What I was talking about over here is in regards to the schedule where we are. We are, if not on schedule, at a schedule. All right? And much of it is because of the work when you're not here, counsel is going over some of the exhibits and some of that, and that's part of some of these breaks, at least for you. All right, so I just kind of want to let you know that's what's going on. So I'm going to excuse you. I know it's been a long week anyway. So we're going to take a break till Monday. All right. And on Monday, the schedule anticipation will start about 9, maybe a little bit later than that. But I ask you to be here ready to go at 9. There's some matters I may have to talk to counsel, so it might give a little bit late start for you on Monday. And then the anticipations will go most of the day. All right. Like I said, we are well on schedule, if not ahead. What I want to remind you now, which you know I'm going to remind you, that you're going to be not here for a couple of days. It's very important. You've heard some of the evidence. You haven't heard all of the evidence. All right. You haven't heard the law that you will apply to this. So you have to keep an open mind. And the best way to do that is don't talk about this with anyone. Don't do any research. Don't watch anything. If something comes on, turn it off. And just like I said, if you're talking to somebody who brings up, blame me. All right? The judge said I am not to talk about it. I'm not to listen to anybody talking about this and shut them down right away. I appreciate all the work that you've put in here so far. I look forward to seeing you on Monday. I hope you have a nice weekend, and we'll see you then. All right, thank you.
Court, all rise. Good. Close your notebooks, please. Place them on the chairs. All right.
The quorum of this court's in session. Please be seated.
All right. Anything else we need to address before Monday morning? Counsel?
No, thank you.
All right. So we'll be in recess on this matter until Monday morning at 9 o'clock. We'll resume the trial. Thank you.
Thank you.
Court, all rise.
Court's in recess. Please exit the court. Thank you.